Ah, this is nice. Just me, some piantas, green grass. Wait, green grass? Giant mushrooms? Fruit grows here? There's even wildlife? But how? None of this stuff can survive without precipitation of some sort. Where's the rain? Now, unless I've completely lost my sanity, which to be fair is a very real possibility, I don't see any weather in this area. I don't see any rain, I don't see hurricanes, thunderstorms, nothing that would indicate that this place has any weather at all. The only thing I have are wind gust enemies, and those don't really count. So what exactly is going on here? How could we possibly have greenery in this location if we don't have any precipitation? I have one explanation. This is a tropical climate. How do we know this is a tropical climate? Let's get into it and I'll explain. This is a tropical region, as evidenced by, well, everything. There are beaches everywhere. Although, why did it have to be sand? Anyway, sorry. I don't like sand. It's coarse, rough, and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Besides that, there's sand, tropical fruits, palm trees, and the weather is nice and dry. But what if I told you that Isle Delfino shouldn't always lack rain? This island is very green, as you can see from the overhead shots of it that we see in the game, indicating there is some plant life here. Now, how is that possible for a place to be sunny all the time yet have green grass? Get ready, because today we're talking about what it truly means to be a tropical island. As we learned in Super Mario Odyssey, it seems that the Mario universe is on a planet that looks suspiciously like Earth. While I'm no geographer and can't pinpoint exactly where Isle Delfino is here, I can tell you generally where it would be. It's going to be near the equator, but not exactly on it. Most tropical islands on an Earth-like planet, like this one, fall within what we call the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or the ITCZ for short. If you're wondering why the acronym, we love acronyms in meteorology. Seriously, could you imagine saying that 5 times fast? There's a reason we call it the ITCZ and not by its full name. I would be here forever. So what is the ITCZ? True to its name, it's where the Earth's trade winds converge. That probably means absolutely nothing to you unless you know what the trade winds are. The trade winds are the permanent east to west winds that flow in the equatorial region. Yes, the equatorial region is exactly what it sounds like. It's the region around the equator. The trade winds mainly blow from the northeast in the northern hemisphere and from the southeast in the southern hemisphere. These winds will come together near the equator and force air upwards, resulting in the formation of the ITCZ. I'm going to make a quick side note before we get too far into this. You may have noticed that I referred to the wind direction as the direction the wind is coming from, not the direction the wind is blowing towards. In meteorology, we often describe wind as the direction the wind is coming from. Now, we don't typically do this when we forecast the weather for you all to make it easier for you, but when we're talking about it in our studies, we often talk about where it's coming from. It takes a minute to wrap your head around, but once I got there, I actually find it easier than saying where the wind is blowing to. That's just me, though. Let's not get too sidetracked, however. Back to the ITCZ. This is typically visible to us from satellite imagery and the radar. We usually see this as cumulus clouds, consisting of rain showers and sometimes thunderstorms. I should also note that the ITCZ isn't a straight line. It definitely has its curves and bends. These clouds can extend for several hundred miles and even be broken into smaller line segments. This line doesn't stay in the same place all year round either. It shifts depending on where the sun is located. You may recall that, depending on where the Earth is in its revolution around the sun, that the hemispheres will receive more or less direct sunlight. For example, during Northern Hemisphere summer, the Northern Hemisphere receives more direct sunlight than the Southern Hemisphere. When this happens, the ITCZ shifts a little bit north, away from the equator, resulting in said area being dry. During Northern Hemisphere winter, we see the opposite occur. This time, the Northern Hemisphere receives less direct sunlight, while the Southern Hemisphere receives more of it. Thus, the ITCZ shifts to the south, also away from the equator. It gets interesting during the spring and the fall, though. During these times of the year, the area receiving the most direct sunlight is the equator itself. This keeps the ITCZ centered pretty much over the equator, not really deviating. Okay, that's all well and good, but what does this mean for us at Isle Delfino? The ITCZ is one of the main reasons why we see rain in the tropics. Depending on where it's centered, it means that, during that season, there will be more or less rain in a location. During spring and fall, for example, the equator, since the ITCZ will center itself near it, Those regions will receive a good chunk of their rainfall during those seasons. Therefore, the wet season around the equator would be the spring and the fall seasons, and its dry seasons would be somewhere in winter where the ITCC has deviated north during Northern Hemisphere summer and south during Northern Hemisphere winter, of course. You may be able to guess where I'm going with this. Given the lack of rain on Isle Delfino, it seems that Mario, Peach, and Toadsworth are on the isle during its dry season, hence why we don't see any rain occur during our time on the island. Well, that's what I would have said, if not for one event that occurs during the game's story. If you've beaten Mario Sunshine before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The Delfino Plaza Flood. As the Delfino Emergency Broadcast System tells us, and I quote, Delfino Plaza has recently experienced a waterfall-like deluge of rain in all areas. Residents are advised to seek shelter on rooftops to avoid the rising flood waters. This flood occurs after you complete Episode 7 in every region on the island. If you don't recall what Episode 7 is, these are the levels where you chase Shadow Mario around, hitting him with water until he falls over and concedes a Shine Sprite. I don't know why we had to do this so many times, but nonetheless we had to do it in every Episode 7. After we beat him for the final time, the plaza becomes flooded, we get this emergency broadcast system, and the only way to stop the flood is to enter an area, any area at all, then exit said area, and the town will be back to normal. We may not see the deluge of rain that occurs over the plaza, but given the floods, we can assume this happened while we were off doing something else. This begs the question, how did this area get rain if Mario and his friends were visiting this place during the dry season? So the in-game explanation for the Delfino Plaza flood is that Corona Mountain exploded, and when it did, it unleashed a ton of water which caused Delfino Plaza to flood. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not realistic, first of all. Second of all, I suspect the explanation is really coming from the fact that Bowser's bathtub is at the top of Corona Mountain. However, that water's also green, so I'm not entirely sure how we were supposed to draw that conclusion. Anyways, we're going to ignore that for the sake of this argument, namely because I don't think that's all that realistic, and while this is a Mario game, suspension of reality is a beautiful thing. It's not exactly the most viable explanation for why Delfino Plaza would flood like this in the middle of a season, hence why I'm ignoring it. I can think of a couple of explanations for this. The most extreme possibility for the plaza getting deluge-like rainfall is a tropical storm or a hurricane. I'm going to go on the record and say this is extremely unlikely to have happened here. There are a couple pieces of evidence that suggest this to me. Firstly, even the weakest tropical storms have substantial wind speeds. Now, I'm not saying a tropical storm is going to uproot a tree or anything like that, but usually there's some evidence of something being broken. Yet, during and immediately after the flood, the town seems perfectly fine. There's no mess of palm branches around and no buildings had their windows broken. It just clearly wasn't windy enough for it to happen. Second, if this were a hurricane, especially one that either makes landfall or comes close to making landfall, the beaches would be an absolute mess afterwards. This would be due to storm surge. The National Ocean Service, a subsidiary of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, defines storm surge as the abnormal rise in seawater level during a storm, measured as the height of the water above the normal predicted astronomical tide. Storm surge usually happens when a storm's winds push water onto the shore. This often leaves the shores of these places looking completely waterlogged and a mess for literal days. Usually there's tons of seaweed, maybe some fish, and anything else that happens to be in the ocean. Okay, either the people in Delfino Plaza are really quick at cleaning up, or when the flood recedes, there wasn't any mess left behind. Looking at the streets and the beach, they're as pristine as they were before the flood ever happened, so I'm going to guess this flood wasn't because of a hurricane. So if this isn't a tropical storm or a hurricane, what could cause rain to occur during a dry season? Well, here's a fun tidbit for you. Just because it's the dry season doesn't mean that it's actually dry for tropical regions near the equator. There's so much moisture available at this location that even during the dry season, an area can receive rainfall. Granted, it's dry relative to what they had during the wet season, but it can still be wet. However, I don't suspect this is what happened here either, as for it to be a full-on deluge would be extremely unlikely during the dry season. I'm not saying it's impossible, very few things are after all, but it's unlikely for sure. If any flooding happened at all during the dry season, it would be relatively minor as the grass and surrounding environments would be trying to absorb all the water that falls first, before it becomes saturated and is unable to do so. Here's what I think is going on here. I think we're starting to see the transition from the dry season to the wet season. It's possible to get deluge-like rainfall during a transition period. Sometimes it even happens where the oncoming wet season starts off with a bang. It's some large-scale event that results in the area getting flooded. We've even seen some seasons start off quite abruptly here in the real world. I recall the Snowmageddon event in 2010, for example. Some areas of the East Coast got a few feet of snow in late October and early November. November is a transitional month of sorts, where it starts transitioning from fall to winter. We can have extreme weather events during a transitional period. Sure, they don't happen every year, but they happen from time to time. Given how suddenly this flood came on, that even the news was startled by this flood occurring, I think that Isle Delfino is just starting to transition to their wet season. Well, if that flood was any indicator, they'll need to be ready for a really wet season. I guess another theory is that the magic paintbrush Shadow Mario has contains the power to control the weather, but somehow that feels even less likely. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe. I have more in the docket that I can't wait to share with you. I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day, everybody.